Okay, wonderful. So good morning, everyone, friends, colleagues, and postgraduate students. Welcome to the sixth seminar series. This is the Humanities Religious Studies Research Collective. My name is Milad Milani, and today's speaker is our colleague, Dr. Daniele Fulvi. As always, before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country, Australia, and their connections to land, sea, and community. I am on Darug land. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Now, my guest, Daniele Fulvi, is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Institute for Culture and Society, the WSU node of the ARC Center of Excellence in Synthetic Biology. He specializes in modern and contemporary continental philosophy and environmental ethics, and his current work focuses on the ethical and social dimensions of technoscientific responses to the climate crisis. Daniele served as chair to Professor Billamoria's talk earlier in the year. We're delighted to have him back to present on his own topic today on the immanent made transcendent, Schelling's immanent ontology. In his talk, Dan moves from Schelling's definition of God as the immanent made transcendent, which he provides in his 1842 lectures on positive philosophy, to explore the implications of such a definition for Schelling's ontology and philosophy of nature. I'm very much looking forward to the talk. Dan, welcome back, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Milad. Thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm gonna share my screen. All right. So yeah, as I said, it's a pleasure to be back here, and thank you all for attending. So before I begin, I would also like to acknowledge that I'm on Darug land today, that I'm on the unceded land of the Darug people, and I would like to pledge my ongoing solidarity to the Darug people and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in their struggle for recognition of sovereignty, historical truth, and justice. So today I will talk a little bit about my research on Schelling that originated from my PhD, and then I eventually turned that into a book that I recently published just a few weeks ago, actually. And the main thesis, the main original thesis that I advance in my book, that I suggest in my book, is that Schelling's philosophy should be read and understood consistently, the early phases to period, as an ontology of immanence. So as a discourse on the immanent features of being. And I use, as Milad said, his definition of God as the immanent made transcendent that he provides in his late lectures, in his late Berlin lectures, as a key to interpret his entire philosophical production, basically. And I will say more about that definition, obviously, during this presentation. So my work is basically part of a revival of interest in Schelling's philosophy that started in the 20th century, thanks to the work of Heidegger and Jaspers, and then later on even Merleau-Ponty and Gilles Deleuze. And it's been continued even by contemporary scholars such as Charlotte Alderwick, for instance, Dalia Nassar, Jason Wirth, just to mention a few of them. So all of these scholars, and I would include myself in that, we are trying to grasp Schelling's philosophy as an independent and complete philosophical system. And again, my specific goal is to grasp his philosophy as a philosophy that avoids metaphysical abstractions and maintains the concreteness of its concept, specifically God and nature, but also freedom. So a couple of preliminary remarks before I move into a detailed definition of Schelling's God. I have identified in my book two trends in recent Schelling scholarship, and I have called them immanentism and transcendentism. So as the name, as these words suggest, immanentism maintains that there is no ontological detachment in Schelling's philosophy between God and nature and between being and particular beings. So being and God are not to be conceived on a superior or supernatural ontological level, as opposed to particular beings. Whereas, according to some other scholars, and even Heidegger and Jaspers, I think would belong to the second trend, to the transcendentist reading of Schelling. They think that for Schelling, the true principle of being and the true principle of God as well is beyond every possible immanent reality. So it's separated and removed from nature, and it belongs to a superior and inaccessible ontological level. Obviously, as you can tell, even from the title of my presentation, I side with immanentism. So what is this definition of God Schelling provides in his Berlin lectures? I will say a few preliminary things about that as well, because before we analyze this definition in detail, there's a few clarifications that need to be made. But pretty much my point will be that through this definition, Schelling basically outlines the ontological process through which transcendence must return to immanence in order to be grasped and understood. So I said return. Schelling thinks that the sheer and transcendent existence of God can only occur by moving from immanence. So that's why return, go back to immanence. So basically, the way I read it, the way I interpreted it, the transcendence that Schelling talks about is immanent made. So made out of immanence, originating in immanence. So this transcendence must return to immanence as a concept of reason if in order to be understood. And I will obviously clarify this part later on. So in these lectures on positive philosophy, Schelling opens, in his very first lecture, he opens by stating or by presenting the students with what he thinks is the fundamental question of philosophy. And the fundamental question of philosophy for Schelling is pretty much a philosophy 101 question, one could say, and yet a question that is worth investigating. Why is there anything at all? Why is there not nothing? So why is there being and not nothing, and not nothingness? So that's where Schelling starts his philosophical exploration of immanence and transcendence in these lectures. As I said, these are his lectures on positive philosophy. So he makes a distinction. He distinguishes negative and positive philosophy. The former is the speculative part, the speculative moment, which we grasp the a priori necessary conditions of being, the necessary but not sufficient conditions of being. So negative philosophy is mainly concerned with the potency of being, with the potential nature of being, whereas positive philosophy grasps the existing being, so the a posteriori being in its actual existence, in its actual occurrence. So not as a mere concept, but in its very concrete actuality. We should not be misled by the use of negative and positive. the terms negative and positive here, by which I mean that Schelling is not saying that negative philosophy is to be rejected and we should only go and embrace the methodology of positive philosophy. Schelling defines negative philosophy as the first science because it's concerned with the a priori necessary rational conditions of being. Positive philosophy as the highest science because it grasps being in its actual occurrence. And only a combination of these two, a synthesis of these two, if you like, are required for true philosophy to occur. True philosophy is philosophy that is both first science and highest science. So philosophy as such, or true philosophy as Schelling calls it, can only begin by assuming an a priori position towards all beings, so grasping the necessary rational condition of being, the potential conditions of being, and end up with the ultimate fundamental existence of being as such. So being in its actual existence. So a combination of the negative and the positive element, if you like. In this sense, Schelling also says that the object of philosophy is true being, Sein, not sein, not being, but true being, which means that being as it fundamentally and ultimately exists. If you like, the roots of being, the ground of being. Ground is a term that Schelling truly likes to use quite often. So being, true being as a pure act that encompasses all potency, which doesn't mean that suppresses or annuls all potency, but encompasses all potency in its act of existence, pretty much. So let's now take a look at the definition that I have identified as central in Schelling's philosophy: God as the immanent made transcendent. So Schelling says, that I'm quoting from his lectures now, God is not, as many imagine, the transcendent. He is the immanent, that is what is to become the content of reason, made transcendent. In that this has been overlooked lies the great misunderstanding of our time. As I have already said, what is a priori incomprehensible, because it is conveyed through no anterior concept, will become a comprehensible being in God, or it arrives at its concept in God, which infinitely exists, that which reason cannot hide within itself, becomes immanent for reason in God. All right, so let's try to delve a bit deeper into this definition. So the original German seems to say something different. In fact, Schelling says, Gott ist nicht das Transcendente, ist das immanent gemachte Transcendente. So the subject here is actually Transcendente. So the literal translation for this would be, God is not the transcendent, but is the transcendent which has been made immanent. So it seems very different from what I'm saying, but I promise I did not make this up. So some philosophers, and I'm thinking of Edward Allen Beach and even the Italian philosopher Luigi Parison, actually translated this statement as God is the transcendent made immanent. The translation that I've read before is Bruce Matthews. Was made by Bruce Matthews, and he also thinks that this should be translated as the immanent made transcendent. And here's my reasoning as to why the immanent made transcendent is a better translation. The verb gemacht here, so the past participle of machen, to make, should be read and translated here as to be made of, or to be produced from, to be made out of, and not to become or to be turned into. Now, I don't know if this is the same reasoning that the same logic that Bruce Matthews followed. He never replied to my email, so I guess we'll never know. But I think that what Schelling is trying to say here is when he says that a transcendent that has been made immanent, he's not saying that we have an original transcendent that subsequently became immanent. What Schelling is saying here is that the transcendence of God, the transcendent existence of God is immanent made, is made of immanence, originates in immanence. So when he talks about the purely existing being, as I said, he's attempting to grasp the very roots of being in a Deleuzian sense, if you like. In fact, this is, I think, also a point in common between Schelling and Deleuze. So he's talking about a transcendence that originates from immanence. So immanence is the source of transcendence. God originates in immanence, momentarily transcends this immanence to think God's own being, and then returns to immanence as a concept of reason, as a rational concept in order to be understood. So this is also, I think, in continuity with Schelling's early philosophy of nature. And Schelling is basically restating once more, the ontological primacy of immanence over transcendence. So once again, this is a dynamic process through which the immanence of being, the concrete immanence of being, originally makes transcendence. But then transcendence can only be grasped and understood when it returns to immanence as a rational concept, pretty much. So what Schelling is saying here is that reason should acknowledge the non-conceptual nature of the pure existing being, because the immediate and immanent and concrete existence of being precedes the speculative range of reason, of human reason, if you like. But then, in order to be grasped, this pure existing being, once it transcends this the reason's speculative range, has to return to its original immanence and make itself accessible by reason through experience. So as a concept of reason, once again. So what Schelling is saying here, he's basically rejecting Leibniz's argument according to which God's essence precedes God's existence, because otherwise God would be a purely transcendent being, completely removed from the immanence of nature and being. And Schelling truly does not think that this is the case, even in his late philosophy. So this dynamic is basically, once again, I'll try to clarify it a little bit better. God, according to Schelling, transcends God's original immanence to think God's own being, and rather than originating from a transcendent act of thought or of freedom that is superimposed on immanence. This is impossible for Schelling, and as we will see, would not make sense and would not give a viable answer to the fundamental question of philosophy. So he wants to clarify this dynamic and to discard a purely transcendent notion of God. He wants to reject the argument that God is a wholly transcendent being, meaning that God originates in a transcendent ontological dimension that is completely removed from the immanence of being. That's exactly what he called the great misunderstanding of his time. So let me say a couple of more things about this, and hopefully this will make it even clearer. So, as we have said, positive philosophy grasps or deals with being in its existence, in its pure existence, without needing an a priori conceptual justification for that. So Schelling himself puts it as follows, and I'm quoting again from his lectures now. He says that the concept of God as it occurs at the end of negative philosophy also provides me with the prius or prius of divinity. This prius, which is a Latin term, however, is in itself that which is irrefutably, indubitably certain, from which on its own account I can likewise proceed if I discard the concept of God. Now, if the divinity is the what, the essence, the potency, then I proceed not from potency to being, but rather conversely from being to essence. Being is here prius, and essence is posterius, so what follows. But this transition is not possible without a reversal, without changing the entire direction of the science that proceeded from that which has the capacity to be, and to break off from it, and to start from the very beginning a new science, which is precisely positive philosophy. So, positive philosophy moves from God as an absolute prius, as what fundamentally exists, preceding all rational concepts. And the goal is to demonstrate God's existence as a matter of fact, as an a posteriori thing, as a res facti, again, using the Latin terminology that Schelling also uses. So, positive philosophy, once again, is above all experience, transcends all experience, and moves from a wholly transcendent notion of God. Schelling makes this move in order to claim that God's existence is not, God's being is not necessitated into existence. God is not necessitated through some sort of mechanistic process into existence, but comes into existence through God's free and contingent, if you like, act. So that's the point of positive philosophy. However, what is important to note on this, in this respect, is that the wholly transcendent God of positive philosophy is exactly that, the God of positive philosophy, not God as such. In fact, again, as I said earlier, true philosophy for Schelling is a synthesis of negative and positive philosophy, is the first science and the highest science. So positive philosophy can only grasp one part of the process of the immanent made transcendent, the transcendent part of that. So again, it does not, positive philosophy alone does not grasp God in God's entirety, I would say. So this also means, again, that God is not necessitated into existence, but rather comes into existence through God's free and contingent act. But we also need to be careful when we use this terminology here. In fact, it's true, Schelling does not think that God is necessitated into existence through a mechanistic process, but he says that God is so not the necessary being, but necessarily the necessary being. So when we talk about God, free act through which God comes into existence, we also have our answer to the fundamental question of philosophy. So what am I trying to say here? When Schelling says that God is necessarily the necessary being, he's saying that God's existence is not contingent in the sense that it's purely accidental, that it could have really gone one way or the other. So the answer to the fundamental question of philosophy for Schelling, why being rather than nothingness, should not be interpreted as, oh yeah, being and nothingness are actually equally possible options that God weighed against one another and then chose being instead of nothingness. But things could have really gone the other way. Like God could have actually chosen nothingness if God wanted to. That's not Schelling's point. Again, God is necessarily the necessary being, which means that God is above being, but does not radically transcend being. God is in the fullest sense of the world, so as a matter of fact and pure act that encompasses all potency. So this means that nothingness could have never been chosen over being. Why? Well, because all things are immanent in God. Nothing can occur outside the Godhead for Schelling. So nothingness can only exist as an eternally suppressed option. If this was not the case, and sorry, this is the case precisely because God is, originates from immanence. In order to then transcend that immanence, to think God's own being, and then to return to that immanence as a concept of reason. If God was a wholly transcendent being, then nothingness could occur, because nothing is immanent in God, and God is not immanent in things. So this also resonates with what Schelling says in his early philosophy of nature. God and nature are not on two separate ontological levels. They are not the same thing. They're not synonyms. They are, for Schelling, kind of polar opposites. But in order to actually be polar opposites, they have to be on the same ontological level. God cannot radically and originally transcend immanence and then superimpose being over that immanence. Precisely because God is in the fullest sense of the word, for Schelling. So just the fact that God is in this fullest sense means that nothingness could have never been chosen over being. So this is, I think, how Schelling answers this question, and why his definition of God is very important to understand his answer to this question. So, precisely because God is in the fullest sense of the word, and God originates in immanence and returns to immanence, when Schelling talks about God being omnipotent, he's not referring to omnipotence, meaning God could do whatever God wants with a snap of his lordly finger and wipe out being. No, Schelling is referring to the omnipotency of God. So God, in his act of existing, encompasses everything that is a priori possible. All the potential features of being are encompassed in the act of God's existence. God encompasses all potency, so omnipotency, not omnipotence. Hence why, once again, being could have never been actually chosen over nothingness. There were not two equally possible options. So let me reiterate this once again. God transcends God's original immanence to think God's own being, and does not originate from a transcendent dimension that is then superimposed on immanence. So, promise I would have said something about Schelling's philosophy of nature as well, so I will. Some scholars have argued that there is a major rupture between Schelling's early philosophy of nature and his later philosophy, positive philosophy, saying that Schelling actually rejected his immanentist philosophy of nature and embraced a philosophy of religious transcendence. Whereas others have said that maybe this is Schelling's late philosophy is just a philosophy of nature by other means. Well, I don't think that Schelling's later philosophy is a philosophy of nature by other means. He's actually talking about God and transcendence. But this doesn't mean that Schelling actually rejects his early philosophy to develop a completely different philosophical system that is based on an original transcendence of God. The way I see it is that Schelling's philosophy of nature and Schelling's positive philosophy are two different moments of his philosophical agenda, his philosophical project, if you like. But these are not two opposite or mutually exclusive moments. Instead, the philosophy of nature provides basically the theoretical background for his later positive philosophy. And when I say this, I'm not saying that Schelling never changed his mind on specific issues. What I'm saying is that the goal of both his early philosophy of nature, and even his middle philosophy, actually, the middle phase where he talks about freedom, etc., and his late positive philosophy had pretty much the same goal, which is that of developing an ontology of immanence, of grasping the very foundation, the very roots of being. But this foundation, these roots, can only occur for Schelling at the level of immanence, cannot, again, originate from some supernatural dimension and then being superimposed on being at a later moment. That wouldn't make sense for him. And this reading is actually, I think, justified even in another late work by Schelling, his 1844 presentation of the process of nature. I don't think there is an English translation of that yet, if I'm not wrong. In fact, I found some pieces translated in Emilio Corriero's article, The Ungrounded Nature of Being in Schelling, or something like that, published in the journal Kabiri. And even in this work, Schelling reaffirms once again something that he also said in his earlier philosophy of nature, that the main object of philosophy is the purely existing being, Seiende, as I have identified it earlier, or the existence in general, independently of all particular and contingent determinations. So this clearly, shows some sort of continuity, between his early philosophy of nature and his later philosophical reflections. So once again, the issue at stake here is not some sort of rational or even transcendent essence of being or of the existence, but actually, again, the actual and original occurrence of being. So again, positive philosophy is primarily concerned, just as philosophy of nature is, with an ontological investigation of the immanent features of being, of the very roots of being. Roots is also a very important term, I think, to understand what Schelling is trying to tell us here. So even his notion of matter is very meaningful in this respect. And lots of work has been done on that. For instance, Dalia Nassar have written a lot on Schelling's conception of matter in his philosophy of nature. And so he also conceived matter as a very concrete and immanent occurrence, which is animated by two opposing forces, right? And that's basically the ground of what grounds the condition of possibility of existence. And even in his late work on philosophy of nature, the presentation of philosophy of nature, Schelling also said that matter must be something actual, so an actus, an act, and of course, in turn, acts as potency for what is to become. So once again, an act that encompasses all potency within itself. So the freedom of potency, in this case, provisionally transcends the concreteness of its actuality, only to return to it as the originally existent. It's a very similar process, as you can see. Schelling is still outlining a deeply immanent process here, because again, the origin of being, the origin of matter, and what basically grounds the condition of possibility for existence for Schelling can never be conceived on a supernatural ontological level. That would just not make sense to him. So again, even in his late philosophy, we can see that he maintains that the core, the kernel of matter lies in the immanence of the actualization of the sheer potency of being, just like the roots of God's existence and of being lie in that very same ontological dimension as well. So this encompassing potency and act by resolving potency into act is the same thing of resolving transcendence within immanence. So once again, postulating a return of transcendence to immanence, to its original immanent core, one could say. There could be more that I could say about this, but I'm happy to leave some of these points for the Q&A part after this presentation. I would just like to mention another couple of things very quickly that I'm also happy to talk about more in detail in the Q&A session as well. So why is this important? Why is this relevant? Well, I think that this kind of ontological process that Schelling outlines is shows some relevance and actuality even in today's philosophical issues when it comes to philosophy of nature. In fact, this also has an important and fruitful, I think, implications for how we understand the human-nature relationship, even in the Anthropocene, and for environmental ethics. So, by accepting this, or, well, maybe accepting is not the right word, but following Schelling's ontology of immanence, then we have a notion of nature that is conceived as not something just merely passive, or something that as an inferior ontological manifestation of being, so that we can also dispose of as we like, but as an auto-productive entity, basically. And Schelling's definition of matter shows that very clearly, I think. So when it comes to the human-nature relationship, this also means that we as humans, should no longer conceive ourselves as, the center of the universe, basically. So Schelling is also suggesting that a traditional anthropocentric approach is not a viable one. In fact, he actually explicitly talks about a decentering of the human self within this ontological process, and understanding the human self and the human being as one being among others, not as a being above others. And he also has a very interesting take on that as well, because he also presents us with a sense of responsibility towards nature as well. In fact, in his essay on freedom, he defines human being, or, well, man in this case, but he means the human being, as the redeemer of nature. And by this, he means precisely that the human being is not the master of nature, but by exercising our freedom in a good and responsible way, we can act for the good of nature, pretty much. And again, this type of understanding, or this account of human freedom, human agency, and the human-nature relationship would not be possible if Schelling thought that nature, or material beings, were just an inferior ontological manifestation of a wholly, purely transcendent God. As I said, I'm happy to talk about this more in detail in the Q&A. And this concludes my presentation. So thank you.